My opponents will tell you that campaign contributions from the wealthy and the powerful don't have an impact. Why do you think these CEOs are making contributions? When you make those contributions, you're first in line to get your concerns taken care of. I believe in democracy, not billionaires owning the system. Our campaign is funded by the working people of this country. We need to take on all of the corporate elite. We need a government that works for working families, not just big campaign contributors. I'm Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message.
So what you just heard there was Bernie Sanders' latest campaign ad, released just a couple days before the New Hampshire primary. And it is basically an attack on Wall Street Pete, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who is the choice candidate of Wall Street, of the billionaire class, of corporate America, more than anybody else right now. And it also connects to what Bernie Sanders said earlier this week, which was to highlight all these news sources noting that Pete Buttigieg is quickly becoming the preferred voice for the richest and most powerful Americans in the 2020 Democratic primary. And Bernie Sanders highlighting this is not just because Pete Buttigieg is rising in the polls and it's looking like it's going to be Bernie Sanders versus Pete Buttigieg in the New Hampshire primary specifically, but also because it's important to tear down Pete Buttigieg's fake image. Pete Buttigieg loves to say that he's a small town mayor, that he's mayor of the town he grew up in, that he's not a Washington insider, that he's not a career politician, that he doesn't have the decades of experience which has made him stale and which has closed him off to new ideas. That's his whole narrative, that the small town guy can't possibly be bought because no one would ever want to buy a small town mayor from Indiana. What's the point? That's what Pete Buttigieg has said, but the reality is that he's the guy for the billionaires. He's got donations from dozens of billionaires. Corporate interests are lining up behind him. Moderate Republicans who don't want to support Trump are lining up behind Pete Buttigieg as their supposed safety candidate. Pete Buttigieg is becoming the mouthpiece, the puppet, the hologram for the rich and wealthy and well-connected in this race. And of course, that's all on top of the fact that Pete Buttigieg doesn't have a working class origin. Pete Buttigieg went to Harvard. Pete Buttigieg has all the hallmarks of a traditional political, social, and cultural and economic elite. He is in no way representative of regular Americans, either in South Bend, Indiana, or in general. And Bernie Sanders pointing out his billionaire ties is crucial. But it goes beyond Pete, and it goes to a wider question of how politics and campaigns and fundraising are done, and how that affects what you will be like if you are fortunate enough to end up governing. And Bernie has noted this plenty of times before, that when you take tons of money from rich people, from billionaires, from corporations, from Wall Street, from corporate-led and elite-led super PACs, you will, subconsciously or consciously, govern in those people's interests and those corporations' interests, and not in the interests of the millions and millions and millions of people whose votes actually gave you the power you wield. And it's the analogy I've always used, that campaigns are like engines, and the fuel is the money. The money you get, the volunteers you get, the support you get is the fuel. And the balance of that, the ingredients in that fuel, determines the emissions. And if your campaign is driven by corporate money and corporate endorsements and the money and support and cultural influence of billionaires, then whether you like to admit it or not, you will be beholden to them and what their vision for America and for the presidency is. This is what happened to Barack Obama, a man who ran with a lot of progressive rhetoric, a man who ran on a lot of progressive ideas because he depended so deeply on the rich and wealthy and well-connected to help him get where he was when he became president. The regular working class and marginalized and young people who came out for him in record numbers didn't really get all that much support from Barack Obama. Barack Obama was willing to compromise with the insurance lobby to build an inferior Obamacare. Barack Obama bailed out the banks, but he didn't bail out individual homeowners. Barack Obama, of course, bailed out some major industries, but wouldn't bail out workers. He wouldn't bail out students. He wouldn't bail out young people struggling in a really bad post-recession job market. There was almost nothing comparatively for workers and students and homeowners as there was for the banks and the biggest and most profitable and most powerful corporations in American society. And that's not specifically a flaw with Obama. That's a general flaw that's plagued Republican and Democratic presidents for generations now. It's not just Obama. It would have been Clinton. It would have been McCain. It would have been anybody in that situation unless they rejected that style of politics entirely, that style of fundraising entirely, and embraced a model based almost entirely off small donations from regular working and middle class people. Because Bernie Sanders has always been clear about one thing: donations influence you. And Bernie Sanders has always been clear about another thing, that he is fighting an election and he is fighting to be a president in the interests of working and middle class people. Bernie Sanders acknowledges the class struggle and he's picking a side. And for the first time in a long time, you have the chance to have a president that's picking the side of regular people in America's generations-long class conflict. So Bernie Sanders, when he's funded by people, he's funded by the interests of working people, of big middle class, of big poor, of big working class, of big struggling to get by, of big wanting healthcare for themselves and their families and their children and their communities. That's who Bernie Sanders is in the pocket of. The millions and millions of regular people that give what they can when they can. You cannot say the same for Pete Buttigieg. Sure, regular people give money to Pete Buttigieg, but that's not really where his campaign is fundamentally fueled. Pete Buttigieg is funded and fueled in wine caves, in corporate boardrooms, in the halls and homes of the richest and most powerful Americans who try to dominate society and try to subvert democracy with their wealth, with their power, with their connections. That's who Pete Buttigieg is. He is not an outsider. He is the ultimate status quo candidate. Maybe even more so than Joe Biden in a lot of ways, when you see just how odd it is for somebody supposedly with no experience, with no connections, supposedly just a regular old small town mayor from the Midwest, getting all of this billionaire support. Why is that? Why would they line up behind Buttigieg and not a more proven neoliberal like Klobuchar or Biden? And the fact is that Klobuchar and Biden, of course, are bought by the rich and wealthy and well-connected too. But they have records. They have footprints. They have their own voice. Pete Buttigieg could epitomize the corporate puppet. Pete Buttigieg has accomplished almost nothing in the political realm. This is a man who has nothing to stand for on his own. And so maybe more than Obama, and maybe even more than some Republican presidents, he will be the perfect foil for corporate America. A tabula rasa for them to write whatever they want on a young, handsome, and in some ways groundbreaking image, yet behind that image is the fundamental neoliberal power that drives corporate America. So Bernie Sanders is truly the outsider still. He may have been in Congress for most of my life, since the early 1990s, but he's always been an outsider in the political process. He will continue to be, and that's because he doesn't take money from the biggest corporations and the wealthiest people. That's why he scares those people. Pete Buttigieg, Donald Trump, they'll both be bought and paid for by the rich and wealthy and well-connected. If it's a Buttigieg versus Trump final general election, whatever you want to call it, they win either way. Bernie Sanders ensures that regular working and middle class people will have a choice to exit the corporate oligarchy.